Hi everyone and welcome back to Explore Your Dark Side. My name is Stephanie Bosch and today I have a fabulous guest with me and it's Jess Baker, and it's an interview for Mental Health Awareness Week, and I have Jess here. And Jess, you are a leadership coach and business psychologist, and I'm really pleased you're here. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking to me.
You're really welcome. Thank you for asking. I think mental health is hugely important, especially in the workplace. There's still so much stigma around people who experience mental health, and we all do to some degree. We all experience a level of anxiety or a level of worry, apprehension, tension, nervousness. We bring that to work with us. We're only human and we are emotional beings. So I think this is really important work. So thanks very much for asking me.
Absolutely, I totally must agree, and I think it's as at least as important as like physical fitness and weight to underestimate it. Just before we dive in, could you just give us a quick introduction for everyone who doesn't know you, who you are, what you do, and what your area of expertise are, like your speciality. So if people want to work with you, they know what you cover best or what you.
Sure. Great. So I actually started out my career in clinical psychology, working, trying to become a clinical psychologist working in mental health. So for the first 3 or 4 years, I worked in the NHS. I really wanted to work with young kids, but I ended up working with older adults, some of whom behaved like young kids, either because they were playful or because they had varying types of dementia, some of whom also experienced suicidal tendencies and depression. So, but I found that too hard. I was empathizing too much with my patients who, and especially as they were older adults, really didn't have very much of a positive prognosis, let's say. And also I really felt I really wanted to change and challenge and improve the services that we were running, and I could see different ways of doing that. But either the NHS didn't have the budget, or I was just too young and eager to really fully understand the scope of the change. So I thought, actually, I can't do this. This is not my zone of genius. And whilst I loved working with my colleagues, and I learned so much from my medical teams and my patients, I actually then retrained in business psychology, and I did a master's degree at Aston Business School in Birmingham. And I actually had a funded master's degree, which is amazing. One of those times when the universe collides and just provides you with what you need. And I had a funded master's, and I worked there as well as a research consultant. And ironically, I ended up working on the NHS staff survey, the attitude survey, but from a business consultant perspective. So I could bring all of my own experience and frustrations to the workshops that I was running when I was hosting NHS staff and listening to their frustrations. I was actually able to empathize with them wholeheartedly. Anyway, to be brief, since then I've worked as a business consultant, both for large consultancies and in-house and in financial services. I was a senior HR manager for 3 years. And I've been self-employed since about 2012, and doing a whole range of different things, including now really focusing on my zone of genius. I have realized is where my own, I was going to say limits, but I think where my own learnings are, and that is with the inner critic, feeling like an imposter, doubting myself, and questioning my ability. And I think that's why I'm so passionate helping other people, men and women, develop in those areas, develop confidence, because for me, the very nub of underconfidence starts in here, with the inner critic, with how we talk to ourselves and our limiting self-beliefs. So yeah, that's what I do. And how you can find me, I can tell you later on, maybe give you some links.
Below in the description below.
Lovely.
Awesome. And I love how you challenge your own thinking by saying it's learning rather than limitations. And I love it because I find we are so often our worst enemies, standing in our own ways. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So inner critic, for everyone who doesn't know what the inner critic is, how do we find out whether we have one? I'm sure we do, but how do we find out when the inner critic talks to us?
Sure. I think that's a really interesting point, actually. Not everyone experiences it consciously. whilst many of us, and I say the words inner critic to most people, they'll go, oh yeah, I have that. Oh, is that a thing that other people have as well? Yes. I'll come back to that in a second, but not everyone experiences it to the same degree. Some people will only have it once or twice in their lives, and they're just full of such self-belief and inner confidence. Maybe it's something that their parents instilled in them, and that they just carry that level of confidence with them, which is absolutely wonderful. But I think they are in the minority. The majority of us experience the inner critic, usually when we're stepping outside our comfort zone. So anytime we start something, change something, want to improve something, or step out of our comfort zone for whatever reason, maybe it's a new relationship, a new job, a new location, that's an opportunity for our inner critic to pipe up and begin to remind us of all the things that might go wrong as a consequence of stepping out of your comfort zone. And so shall I explain why it does that? Because I think this is the fascinating part, because I've read a million books on, well, actually only 3 or 4 I think are actually published on, one is called Banish Your Inner Critic. One is called Conquer Your Inner Critic. And it's all about striving to get, sorry?
Proper fighting language.
Yeah. It's supposed to like, fighting and it's striving and beating it and conquer. And I think actually I turn that on its head and I say, no, befriend it. Your inner critic is there because it is protecting you. It's trying to protect you from failure, humiliation, making a mistake, potentially, a broader negative impact as well. If you make a mistake, what then? Now, however, often, and I think, if I can put the inner critic in a kind of physical place, and I would say it lives in the amygdala, which is a little almond-shaped gland that sits in your limbic system, which is an area of the brain that controls emotions, positive and negative emotions, and fear and anxiety are triggered, triggers the amygdala. So let's go back 200,000 years, okay? Our ancestors were successfully, because they're our ancestors, successfully roaming the wilderness, where they come across things like cave bears. Now, they think, do I fight this or do I run away? And in so doing, they're not actually standing there thinking, oh, maybe I should fight this thing because one of them killed Uncle John last week, oh, that was a terrible shame, blah, blah, blah. They don't have any time to think any of this, right? Their amygdala has already been activated and it's sending messages around the body to say, stop digesting. We don't need to digest at the moment, which is why you might have sensations of butterflies in your tummy and a level of tension there when you feel nervous or anxious. And it says, let's send as much blood and oxygen as we can to the larger limbs so that we can either fight or run away. Fight or flight phenomenon, most of us have heard of that. Yeah. And that's perfectly brilliant and amazing that our bodies can do this. And it does happen these days. For example, if you were to step off the curb to cross the road and without realizing there's a speeding motorbike coming from around the corner, you immediately step back onto the curb into safety. You don't have the chance to think, oh, there's a motorbike going rather quickly. It might kill me. What should I do? Yeah. But it's the difference between actual life-threatening situations and perceived life-threatening situations. Yes. So what our amygdala fires now as in situations where we perceive threat. Maybe it's an email from your boss at 10 to 5 saying, see me in my office immediately. Maybe it's a client phoning you at 8 a.m. or it's close to out of hours, and you start thinking, oh my God, why are they calling me at this hour? Yeah. And if you're already experiencing anxiety and tension elsewhere in your life, your amygdala is already kind of almost heightened. It's more readily going to respond negatively to those scenarios. So that's why, to bring it back to the original scenario, when we're stepping out of our comfort zone, actually what's happening is our inner critic is trying to protect us by saying, don't do that, you'll humiliate yourself. Don't go on this interview, Jess, you'll say something stupid and you'll mumble over your words and blah, 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 and they'll make, and you'll make a fool of yourself and everyone will see. Well, that's just life anyway, who cares? But, it's just trying to protect me.
Again, which is not what any one of us would think anyways, but yeah, it's just perceived, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so and that brings me to, and there are a number of different facts that I really want to share actually with your audience about the inner critic. It's usually completely irrational.
Is for you like the inner critic the same as the lizard brain?
Mm.
Are them like the same?
Not really. I mean, what's your lizard brain? Describe that to me.
Well, the lizard brain, the unconscious that takes over when fight, flight, freeze or anything is ticked. So not necessarily like this critic talking to you, but really like getting into. So I talk about the dark side. How does the behavior change under pressure, right? So the point when we no longer are reflective, no longer self-aware, and when the lizard brain just like takes over and we go back to more or less just like gut feeling and just doing without reflective thinking.
Yeah, okay. And this part of the brain really developed with mammals, as far as I'm aware. So it's the emotional reaction. So yes, whilst the reptilian brain definitely does include the fight or flight, probably, what do I do here? Am I under threat? I'm going to run away. There's more of a developed process where our brain has remembered past experiences where we may have failed, or where we may have been told, Jess, you're not good enough. Why would you do that? Don't do that again. It was, the last time you presented, it was terribly boring and everyone, was looking on their phone. Therefore, don't do that again because that wasn't a very nice scenario. So yes, they're definitely connected.
It's more or less than like holding, like the memories holding grudges. Can you say that? Is that?
Yeah, I suppose so. And I think that's the thing as well, isn't it? To remember that, as I'm sure you already know, that your brain's more likely to recall negative experiences and memories than it is positive ones. Stephanie, we need to acknowledge that our brain is not wired to keep us happy. Our brain is wired to protect us.
Yeah, and keep us
yeah, keep us alive. So yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. I'll let you go ahead with the
with my facts. Okay, yeah. So where was I? No, it's good. So the largely unconscious. We're generally not aware when we're doing it. Generally, although the moment I do say to some people in the critic, they're like, oh, like when I say to myself, I'm not good enough, or I'm useless, or I'm always going to be an 8, or I'm not the kind of person who deserves success in work or relationships, or I'm not the kind of person who could ever get fit. Yes, exactly. We're not normally conscious of it, but it's there. It's often irrational. And one of the many ways in which I help clients to understand and befriend their inner critic is by using a technique called cognitive disputation, which is from cognitive behavioral therapy, but I can talk about solutions and exercises later on perhaps. Other things, it's normally, in my experience, my vast experience of my own personal library, collection of inner critic thoughts and unhelpful beliefs, and those of my coaching clients too, it's normally something someone once said to you, about you, or even in front of you, and your brain latched onto it as some kind of truth.
Yeah, I have that as well.
Yeah. So it might be from childhood, it could be parents, someone in the family, a sibling that once said something to tease us. It could be a bully in the playground, it could be a teacher, it could have been a boss, it could have been a lover, hopefully an ex-lover, if they're saying horrible things to you. And for whatever reason, our brain has latched onto it as true. And because it's in our head, we don't question it as readily as we question other people's behaviors and motivations. Don't know about you, but I often challenge other people and think, why are they saying that? Or why would they do that? Or yet we rarely challenge our own belief system. And it's the brain also has a lot of opportunity to rehearse this stuff. If you think that we have about, depending on which internet page you look at, anywhere between 70,000 and 90,000 thoughts a day, most of which are on repeat, most of which are negative. And I don't know about you, but I'm 43. I've had the same thoughts again and again and again and again. So they are very well ingrained in who I am. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to break from this negative cycle.
Yeah, I feel also the moment you're getting into anxiety mode, there is no rationality anyways anymore.
Yeah.
So often it's so difficult to get yourself out of this thinking, because it, you know, it would have to do with like self-worth, etc. Yeah, I can relate. I feel it's incredibly difficult to stop yourself and be like, enough, and replace it with something positive or whatever it might be. Yeah, which you would do with a friend, because you see their value more clearly, right?
Absolutely. It's much easier to see their position, isn't it? And it's easier to soothe them. We probably wouldn't soothe ourselves if we were feeling anxious. We'll probably say, God, get over it. You know, why am I feeling this way? Everyone else seems to be able to cope under the pressure, or no one else would have this feeling. And we start berating ourselves. So there's almost like an extra layer of self-negativity and self-criticism that we add on to that. Again, which makes it really hard to break. And of course, to your point about getting caught in this kind of almost unhelpful cycle of anxiety, is that our thoughts and beliefs lead to our behaviors, determine our behavior. And then you get caught up in a negative cycle, because our behaviors then, especially if they are too unhelpful, end up keeping us on this cycle. So the thought is, let's take self-sabotaging. I'm talking a lot at the moment about self-sabotaging, procrastination, deferring, delaying, not making any decisions, and it can be to do with work, business, family, your partner. You know, are you sabotaging your relationships, money, health, fitness, anything, you know? And I'm finding that the more I talk about it, the more people come up with their own really creative ways of procrastinating and finding other things to do instead. But what happens is, when let's take procrastination, for example, you know, we set a deadline to do something, or we're given one, and it could be at work, for example. And the moment that deadline has been set, there are lots of things, lots of tasks unfinished, uncompleted, incomplete, right? That in itself can cause a level of anxiety, especially for someone who, like me, who likes a to-do list and to get things done. But what's happened also is there's a number of questions that have been that are unanswered until it's completed. Like, will I get it done? Will I get it done to a good enough standard? Will I get it done on time? You know, what will other people, how will they judge it? Anyway, so we get into this kind of procrastination of, I'm actually too scared now to do anything about that particular challenge or goal. I'm going to do something different. And by doing something different, which is not acting in my own best interest, which is nothing to do with achieving that goal, I'm actually trying to kid myself, but all the while I'm doing this displacement activity, or cleaning my desk, or tidying my office, or phoning other people, or, you know, making other so-called business development activity. All the time I'm doing that, I'm actually feeling worse about myself, because I know I cannot kid my brain to think anything else. My brain knows, Jess, you're not getting it done. It's been 3 days now and you haven't started, you know.
And then it gets more panicky mode, because the task just gets more and more to do and bigger. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we can get caught in this like downward spiral of helplessness ultimately, and feeling rubbish. And then, you know, having that extra layer of thoughts like, I'm so useless, I'd never complete anything. All the evidence suggests A, B, and C, but actually, to be honest with you, Stephanie, there's probably very little evidence for any of the stuff happening in your head right now. Because if you're the kind of person who does procrastinate, or if you're the kind of person who does worry about the deadline, you're probably the kind of person who does actually get things done. And you probably are conscientious enough to get them done well. So if you look at all the evidence, it's probably, yes, well, I managed to pull that off, and I managed to do this, and I managed to, you know, deliver on A, B, and C last time. Of course I can do it this time. So anyway, yeah, it's very painful, but at the same time, it's almost laughable how we readily get ourselves into these situations time and time again.
So why would we have then this self-sabotaging behavior? Is there any, like, do you know, is there any studies around why this happens, and why we just not get it, like, you know, crack on and do it?
I think ultimately it's just due to the fear of failure. The fear of failure. And I think sometimes the fear of success as well. You know, if there's a chance that there's this unknown impact is going to have, then how do we, it's out of our control. And I think sometimes it's knowing that things are out of our control that makes us feel anxious.
Yeah, true. And I think especially what you said, like this fear of success, I truly believe that most of us are not scared of the dark side, as I call it, like the negative bits, but I think most of us are really scared to be truly great and be the one who has to get it done and take on the responsibility, because I think that's just so far out of our comfort zone to step up and be brilliant.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think, it is that stepping out of a comfort zone, and you use the word responsibility. And I think, and sometimes people say, oh, why do we procrastinate and blah, 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 self-sabotage? Is it? Actually, it's easy not to. It's so much easier to not bother, to sit in front of Netflix series and just watch episode after episode without even having to leave your seat to press next episode because the next episode is about to play in 4 seconds. It's easier not to. And I think a lot of the people that I work with are ambitious and they are conscientious and they do want to do a really good job, but they also do really want success. But at the same time, because they're caught in their self-doubt, there is a deep-seated belief that they are not certain whether they are the right person to take on the responsibility. They do doubt whether they could put it off. And I use the word put it off because it's almost as if by magic or by luck that these things happen. And that's how people, especially with the imposter syndrome, see things. Oh, well, it happened as if by magic, as if by luck. It wasn't me. It wasn't any of my hard work or my effort or the 15 years experience that I've got. Yeah. We tend to discount credit, really, where credit's due.
Just want to quickly get in there, because I know that in the English speaking countries, imposter is quite a well-known word or label. I know though that in Germany and probably Austria, Switzerland, etc., it's not known at all or very limited. Could you just quickly give just a definition of imposter syndrome, what it is, so people can get on track?
Yeah, sure. It's just that feeling where you feel like a fraud. So you feel like, let's say you get a job, but it's a more senior level than you've worked in before, and you get to your laptop and you get to your open plan office and you sit down and suddenly you think, oh my goodness, I'm surrounded by really capable people who know what they're doing. Did I get this job by luck, by pure chance? Maybe I was the last chance candidate. Everyone else on the list said no thank you, and so they chose me. That's an example of the imposter syndrome. It's a term that was coined back in the 1970s by 2 female researchers in America, because they started talking. They were both psychotherapists, and they started talking about how they didn't feel comfortable in this academic environment, even though they were both professors and both academics doing really great work. And then they started to talk to other academics around and students about how they didn't quite feel they deserved to be there. So these researchers, Pauline Clance and Susan Imes, I think it's 1976 or something, they coined the term imposter syndrome and described it as an intellectual self-doubt. But for me, from now and for my working definition is not so much a focus on the intellectual self-doubt, because they were academics working with academics in an academic environment, so intellect was very, very important. And for me, my working definition is kind of really self-doubt about yourself, your ability, where in fact you do have evidence that you are qualified and expert in your field. So yeah, does that help?
I think it's also so often it just happens to the most capable people, and from an artist perspective you would be like, how could she or he ever think that, right? It's
absolutely
it doesn't make any sense at all from an artist perspective. But yeah,
and I think about the imposter syndrome, one really interesting thing. So I deliver keynote talks on the imposter syndrome and the inner critic, and I always get questions at the end. And I had explained that the imposter syndrome, I also gave it a cycle. So it's not actually, although it's called a syndrome, I must also add this, please. It's not a medical term. They use the word syndrome, but it's not a medical term. However, it is very debilitating. If you're experiencing the imposter syndrome, it can be totally debilitating and prevent you from doing anything and getting anything done. So I think it does need to be taken seriously. But from my perspective and all the research that I've read, it seems to be that people that experience the imposter syndrome are those who are driven and motivated by fear, the fear of by not being good enough, the fear of wanting to be perfect or wanting their work to be perfect, but worrying that it's never going to be perfect. And of course, perfect doesn't really exist. Perfect only exists in holiday magazines or airbrushed images of, skincare adverts, right? So people with the imposter syndrome tend to have such high levels, often unrealistic expectations of themselves and others, that no matter how hard they work, they never actually meet those standards. And even when people say, well done, that was a great job, you did fantastically well, they will discount the credit. They will be afraid to take on and internalize those positive messages of feedback because their fundamental belief is that they are not good enough, which means they have to work harder than anyone else, strive harder. But normally, because they're the ones in the team working 80% harder and longer than anyone else in their team to try and prove themselves, they're probably the ones that do actually get more responsibility. They probably do get offered promotions. And so they're kind of caught on this cycle of success, fear, striving, success, fear, and striving. And it's one of those things that's really difficult to break unless you can rationally see what's actually happening. And that until you can acknowledge what's going on in your head is unhelpful.
Yes. Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry, we got a bit off the track. Sorry.
I didn't warn you I could talk about this stuff for days. So
no,
yeah.
I love it. Just maybe to get back to our original question of the inner critic, where would you say is the difference between the imposter syndrome and the inner critic? So is the imposter syndrome the result of the inner critic, or is it totally different?
Yeah, I think so. So I don't have any studies to prove this, okay? But in my experience, having worked with hundreds of leaders, hundreds of men and women in the last 10 years or so as a psychologist, and having experienced it myself, I think the inner critic, for perfectionists, the inner critic can then become the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I think if you're unlikely to experience the imposter syndrome if you're not holding yourself up to very, very, very high standards. Whereas the majority of us experience the inner critic at any one time, just because we have internalized other people's negative messages of us.
No, I think it makes sense, and I would agree. And I mean, I'm self-harming, I think I mentioned in the pre-call, since a very young age. And yeah, imposters definitely I think I carry around with me. So I think it makes sense to come from, that it just evolves probably over time.
Yeah. And I have spoken to people that have experienced the imposter syndrome. One woman came up to me. I was on stage in Westminster last September, speaking to, it was supposed to be a group of 100 people in a small breakout session during this one-day event. It turns out that the small breakout was so popular that they had to keep me in the keynote plenary session. So I talked in the main hall with over 500 women. And I know that there are over 500 because the organisers kept saying, oh no, bring more leaflets. We've got 300, but we'll need more, blah, blah. Anyway, I took about 450 in the end. And even then there was a sea of hands going up saying, we don't have a handout. So phenomenal, isn't it? And it's not just women, it's men too, who experience this. And straight after, 3 women ran up on stage to tell me their own experiences. And one of them said she'd experienced it from a very, very early age. Going through school, even though she was an A-star student all the way through school and university, became a lawyer just as her parents wanted her to, and I think sometimes just as we experience the inner critic, we can also, if we've experienced it once, we're more likely to experience it again. I think that's the same for the imposter syndrome. Wherever you get to, whichever level you are at, working with a 57-year-old woman at the moment who's a senior lawyer, and she's still experiencing the imposter syndrome. It's like, I don't think they want to make me deputy CEO, but I don't think I can do it. You know, I don't think I've got enough experience, she says. Wow, isn't that sad?
And
But
again,
she's not alone.
it doesn't make any sense, right? Like,
No.
I'm like, of course you can do it, you know. Yeah, I think, but this is why I think it's so important to have these conversations and to really have this stigma removed and open up that it's not just me or not just you experiencing, but then so many of us who do.
Yeah.
So
and I would,
yeah,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I would urge anyone watching this as well, Stephanie, to start the conversation with other people. You know, ask an open question. Have you ever experienced this thing? You know, and if not, do you know anyone that has? Because it's up to us now to take on the challenge of actually starting the conversation. I urge everyone I speak to do this, because it can be such a lonely experience, because it's, you know, the inner critic's really good at telling us that we're the only one experiencing this. So we can get caught in secrecy. And then that in itself just builds more shame. Like, oh my goodness, I am the terrible person. I am this awful person. I am the only one experiencing this. I can't possibly say at work how I'm really feeling, because they will accuse me of being, you know, the sensitive one, or the one who can't cope, or, you know, underconfident. And then I'm never going to, you know, be asked to take on more responsibility, and they will look down on me, and I'll be stigmatized in some way.
Yes. And I think this is so interesting when you said, like, these labels we put in on ourselves in our head. And when I started the project of Ditch Your Mask, I finally showed up to share my own story, and I thought, oh my God, I'm still tempted to take this video down. But so many people who have watched it without me sharing it were like, oh my God, it's really raw, it's beautiful, you know, like really positive feedback. I'm like, what's going on? I think simply because, like, vulnerability is okay. You know, if we can draw lessons from it, I think it does make sense.
Yeah.
Not about, like, you know, throwing pity parties, which is not anyways probably related to people with imposter or inner critic. But yeah, I think we especially with the work of Brené Brown, etc., it seems to be more okay to talk about being human.
Yeah, she's definitely bringing it to the forefront, which is amazing. And I love that about her work. It's really very important. And obviously it's evidence-based, which is even better than just some person turning up, you know, talking woo-woo. But I think the inner critic is definitely related to all experiences of mental health issues, you know, because it is just my name and a label for the things that we say to ourselves. And in your experience of self-harm, you know, there will be things that you have told yourself that probably aren't true and are probably completely irrational, and you know, and therefore unhelpful. And I think that's really just my label for the, you know, those unhelpful thoughts that we have. And you know, to varying degrees, they can be unhelpful, can't they? I too shared a video last June. It does the rounds on Facebook. I still get people commenting on it and sharing it, but I don't promote that ever, you know, really. I'll talk about it, but I won't ever say, here's the link. But I shared my own story of growing up with a narcissistic mother. So she had a personality disorder, but while growing up, I thought it was me. I thought I was the problem, because that's how she explained it. So I thought I was the one who was in the wrong and doing the wrong thing the whole time, and being criticized and bullied and or ignored. So there's definitely an opportunity for us to be more vulnerable. And like you say, not necessarily, it's not a case of pity party or even oversharing. It's a case of saying, actually, this is my experience. And if it helps you in any way to know about my experience, then great. Go share it, go talk about it, go start the conversations with others, because you never know who's experiencing this stuff. You know, they're doing so behind closed doors, and they're probably presenting as very successful or polished people, or you know, they seem really together, and you will never know the stuff they tell themselves in front of the mirror every morning, or at 3 a.m. at night when you wake up with those 3 a.m. fretting experiences, you know.
Absolutely. And I think also sharing the story, I think it's both for you. Probably growing up, you wouldn't, you know, you had no comparison, so you didn't know that it's different with other people, you know, that it's a different setting maybe. And I think then sharing the story and the lessons learned is so powerful, because people then can realize and sometimes even become aware that, maybe something is off, especially when you say that,
Yeah.
that everyone is really aware of the inner critic, which I found really interesting, because I thought everyone would be, yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, I still meet people who go, really, what's that then? Or when I describe the imposter syndrome, oh, what's that? In fact, I told one of my friends, and she said, oh, and I said, I described it, as people who don't feel like they're capable of doing the job, and feel underconfident and doing a really good job, etc. She's like, oh yeah, I work with people like that all the time. So she'd identified them as imposters but not herself. I thought that was brilliant.
Oh. I was like, oh, okay, I see. Some people just simply can't do their job. I think theirs different.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh, I love it. I mean, being a bit conscious of time, you said you maybe can share with us a few tips or tricks on how to get a bit, maybe, if we're really in a pickle, get into this circus of like, maybe even like anxiety and self-doubt. What can we do?
So first of all, become more consciously aware of it. So write it down. Write down your inner critic. Write down all the things you might be procrastinating about. Write down all the things you're not doing, all the things you feel afraid of. And it's going to be potentially a long list, and it's going to be really uncomfortable doing this. So maybe do it with a friend, or do it when you've got 15 minutes to just brain dump everything, and then have 15 minutes of high vibe music to listen to, or something fun to go to, so you're not kind of sucked into the drama. But it's really important to become more consciously aware of what's going on in your head. Also, by writing it down or even saying it
quickly, I think there's a really important point to get it out, but then do something fun, like listening to the music or something. I think this, because it's mental health awareness, maybe we highlight this, do something fun afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you could list, so I would say, tune in to it, name it, call it out, say, when I say name it, I don't mean call it Shirley, but tell it how it is, and say, oh my goodness, I felt this before, and I have felt this in situations where, A, B, and C, and this is a thread through my life. And you can start to identify themes, or situations or people that trigger your inner critic. For me, it used to be my mum triggering my inner critic. But it can be, like I was saying at the very beginning, anytime you're stepping out of your comfort zone or trying something new or taking on more responsibility. And then I would suggest you look into, you can Google disputation, or you can read about these in my blogs on my website. The very act of trying to engage your rational brain instead of listening to your irrational, emotional brain can help you, because you're actually going to be looking for evidence to support your inner critic. So if it says I'm useless and I'm lazy, where's evidence to support that? Actually, there's very little evidence to support that. Okay, so is there evidence to support the opposite? If the opposite is true, actually I am capable and I have achieved things, where's the evidence for that? And so that might be something like rewriting your CV, or just brain dumping all the things you've achieved or all the things you've done successfully. And it can be anything from, a small homemade project to something that you've done in your career or your personal life. Because, as I was saying earlier, that we're really good at being critical of ourselves, I also strongly advocate being more compassionate to ourselves. So we're so good at being critical, we really have to try and balance that with self-compassion. And you and I know it's much easier to be friendly, to be kind to somebody else. If the friend phones up saying they're in terrible trouble or they're upset, we soothe them, we reassure them, we if we can, we give them a big hug, or we take them for a cup of tea or a glass of wine, and we listen to them and we give them time and we reassure them and we validate how they're feeling. We say, that sucks right now, but you know what, you won't always be feeling like this. Remember the past times that you can get through this and there are happier times ahead. We can say those things to ourselves too, but we don't. We're too busy being caught up in this negative cycle.
Absolutely. And I think I just empathize on this again, because being German, I know my parts over there. It's okay to be compassionate, and it doesn't mean it's all about ourselves. So it's not. There's a massive difference between like self-love, compassion, self-love, and falling into like narcissistic behavior or anything. So
yeah, interesting you say that. A lot of people say, well, isn't that selfish to put myself first? When I will argue that and say, well, no, because if you can't, it's almost like if you see yourself as a battery, you have to we have to refuel, we have to slow down, we have to stop, we have to engage with what we need, and feeding our own needs, whether that's time out, having a bath, going for a long walk, having a coach, or finding a friend to have some quality time with. Those things can help us refuel, and that allows us to give even more away. That allows us to be the best at what we're doing, to focus at work, to focus on our family, to give even more love to other people, and to be more compassionate to them. So it's not selfish, but a lot of people will say, oh, that, you know, that's you know, I don't have time for that. And I'll argue, well, you do actually. And it's not about questioning. I think self-compassion is essential.
Yeah, it's
essential practice in this day and age where we are so under pressure from all different angles to be better, faster, stronger, more focused, doing more with less, yada yada yada, you know.
And I think especially my GP said that once to me just before hitting burnout. He said, well, you either take the time now or you will have to make time for it. And I think that's so true. So yeah, we might not have time for it, but we should find the time and make time for it.
Yeah, there's a lovely phrase that I heard somewhere along my kind of journey with meditation, because I'm trained in mindfulness, self-compassion, and mindfulness-based stress reduction as well. And it's something like, if you don't have time to meditate for 20 minutes, you should meditate for 40.
Love it, yes.
Yeah. But on the note of self-compassion, can I please promote this woman, Dr. Kristin Neff, Kristin. She has a lovely website called Just Self-Compassion, loads of research and lots of free meditations on there too. And I just always guide people in that direction if they're interested in finding out more. It's just a really nice resource.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And we'll link this below as well. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Great.
So we have, sorry, just to sum it up. So we have taking care of yourself, being more friendly, or becoming first aware of what you're saying to yourself, then taking care of yourself.
Yeah, so tuning in, disputing, so engaging your rational brain to dispute the irrational thoughts you're having and the irrational beliefs you hold, finding out whether there are any themes or any particular situations or people that trigger them, because that can be really helpful in predicting how you're going to respond in future scenarios that are the same. If you're seeing the same person, or if you're going into the same situation, you know your inner critic is going to be triggered. Knowing that can help you feel more empowered, and you can start working your way towards being able to manage that and cope with it better. Then, of course, being self-compassionate to counter the inner critic. And there are lots of different ways that I promote to help counter the inner critic, but those are the three that are most obvious and most simple, really, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I could talk to you forever, but I think this is such a perfect note to end this. And thank you so much for your time. As I said, we will link all your details below, so when people maybe have come across the inner critic during this interview, or maybe have met them before already, they can get in touch with you. You are UK based, so which kind of areas would you cover? Do you travel for business as well?
I do, yeah. So I'm based in Shropshire, in the middle of nowhere. I relocated a couple of years ago, kind of by mistake, but I love it. But I do a lot of traveling. And tonight, for example, I'll be working down in Surrey. Tomorrow, I do work in Surrey, London, Manchester, Cardiff, all over the place. And I do a lot of coaching online as well. So I have a global community of coaching clients. And I run a free 5-day challenge called Tame Your Inner Critic. So I'll definitely send you the link to that as well. That's running again in June. So perhaps your viewers will want to
perfect timing. And I think what a perfect way to also get to know you better and tame the inner critic and make friends maybe with a critic.
Yeah, that's right. Befriend it. Don't try and push it away, but try and get to know it, thank it, befriend it, appreciate it. It's only trying to protect you, and then it'll be easier for you to move forward as well. Because I think the more we try and strive to push things down or suppress our feelings, the louder they become and the stronger their impact on us. So I wholeheartedly think we should be befriending our inner critic and taming it gently. Thank you so much for having me.
Sounds awesome. Love it. Thank you so much, Jess, and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.